services. She Miss Laksha actively provides counseling support to our in-house counselors. She facilitates intervention processes with schools by providing them consultations, and more importantly, she's our in-house. Uh, I would say somebody who we all go down for documentation processes and to manage our record keeping logs. Miss Laksha has actively volunteered and given her time with multiple organizations, NGOs, and startups across Bangalore. She has quite a bit of experience working on one is to one with children, teenagers, and adults, as well as providing educational support, training support for vocation for various children and teenagers in multiple NGOs previously. So, with that being said, Laksha, I hand over the platform to you.
Thank you so much, Ashrita. Before I start, I'll just share my screen. Just let me know if it's
Yes.
visible.
Yeah. Visible Laksha. Can you move to the next screen? Next slide. Yes.
Okay.
We're able to see.
Okay. So good evening, all. As Ashrita said, my name is Laksha. I am one of the in-house psychologists at Health Basics. I work closely with Ashrita. So today, the workshop title or the workshop that I wanted to facilitate was about child counseling. Um, so I decided to name the workshop as Big Feelings, Little Minds, because working with children, I think I've realized that a lot we think that children might sometimes not, they might, why would they think about something so serious, or why would they have big feelings like the way adults do. But most often than not, I would say that is not the right way to think, and children also have a lot to think and a lot to say. And that's when I think child counseling as a topic or as a thing becomes very essential for when we are interacting with children. Obviously this can also work for the psychologists in the meeting, and also for people who are just looking to connect with children better, how we can understand and empathize with our children and the children that we are part of in our lives. So obviously the first thing I would want to focus on is, why is child counseling important, because it plays a very crucial role in understanding and just ensuring that the child is having a healthy emotional and mental well-being. you know so when we give them a very safe space for them to express their feelings, because a lot of times what happens is that a lot of people around the child's life is not able to understand them, because obviously they are not very communicative, or they don't have the words to express what they're feeling. So when we give them a safe space to express, what happens is that they are able to express their feelings, one, and also develop healthy coping mechanisms. When we help them, they are able to do better. It also helps us in addressing various behavioral and psychological issues that are very prevalent in children, like ADHD or anxiety, or if a child might be depressed, or and also helping to make sure that we don't escalate these problems. We are able to tackle them when it starts. And it also helps to build the self esteem and confidence, because at the end of the day, when we look at therapy, when we look at counseling, the main I would say the main goal for anybody, for my clients, would be to build that self esteem and confidence, where they're able to develop that positive self image of themselves, where they're able to independently understand a problem and independently be able to be resilient at the end of the day. And it also improves their social skills when we help them to teach, when we teach them how to communicate effectively and how they can build these healthy relationships. And it also helps children in various life transitions, especially when the adults around them are going through a lot of stuff. If you take, for example, divorce, or the loss of a parent, or the loss of someone very close to them, when children lose their grandparents, when they lose a very important caregiver of their life, or say children are moving from various homes. Children might come to the school, say moving from a different city that might have been their home for a long time. This can be very overwhelming for the children, not just for the parents. Right, so helping them to understand these life transitions, and helping them to get to open up about that grief, open up about that loss, is also something that child counseling can really help with. And also it can help children recover or understand and process bullying, and the trauma that comes from bullying, and the trauma that comes from a lot of these life transitions, and by fostering that resilience and trust. It also helps to improve their academic performance, because when we look, if you work with children, we know that the first thing that usually drops is their academic performance. So we can help them by reducing or maybe helping them understand the stress, or if the stress is because of school related things, and also helping them with that, like how to help them with with time management, or with helping them with the relaxation techniques. So overall, I would say that child counseling is very important to nurture this healthy and adjustment to the changes that will come into their lives, because there is no way for us to stop the change that is happening, because children are constantly growing and developing, but helping them or sort of ensuring that they are able to cope up with the changes that are happening. So I would say that is some of why we need child counseling, or why we need child focused way to help the children. Obviously, we will focus on the methods or certain techniques that we can use. But first, I think I would want to focus a little bit on, what is the research, or what is the theory that is there behind, why child counseling is important. So I would want to talk about this very interesting experiment that was done by Harry Harlow. Um, he had done this experiment with rhesus monkeys, like you can see in this picture. So what he did was he had he sort of separated these baby monkeys from their mothers, and put in these surrogate mothers, which one was made with wire and the other was made with cloth. The cloth mother didn't give any like food, or it didn't give it any physical, like the physical need. It was just soft and cuddly. But the wire mother, while it was very rough and tough, it used to provide the child with the child monkey with food, with the milk and all of that. What Harry Harlow assumed was that because food is a very basic necessity for any organism, that the baby monkey would be more close to the wire monkey. But what he understood after the experiment was that, despite the wire monkey giving a lot of the milk and the food, where that basic necessity was sort of fulfilled, the monkey always went to the soft, the cuddly, the cloth doll for comfort. It always went to comfort when it was feeling scared, when it was feeling for that emotional comfort or for that safety. It always went to that because it was more close to how the monkey resembled, how its mother would have resembled. So here we can see that the baby monkey is always looking for that emotional comfort, and more important than nourishment, it doesn't want the food, but it wants that nourishment that the cloth monkey is giving. So what this sort of tells us, sorry, what this tells us is that, not when a child is growing up, they don't only need food, water, and the physical things to be given to them. There's also about how the love and the physical comfort, the physical touch, is essential for a healthy psychological development, and not just for the basic necessities like food and water, but also this extra aspect of that emotional safety, or that emotional connection with the child. This helps the child, it helps in their attachment styles, which we will come to a little later, like after this. But we also see that when there were various iterations of this experiment, where in one setting the baby monkey was shown, it was sort of put in a very scary environment, and they noticed that the monkey would always go to the cloth monkey, even though the wire monkey was giving the food. When it wanted safety, it always went to the cloth monkey. And I think we can somehow relate that to how, as a parent, or as people, or as adults around children, it's not just making sure that they have their things, but also that emotional comfort that we are giving them. That is why safe spaces are very important for children to express themselves, and that also gives them that healthy psychological development. Okay, so understanding child psychology. So as I was talking about that experiment, the attachment theory that was given by Bowlby and Ainsworth, the main goal of that, the theory was to sort of show how a secure attachment style in helps really in emotional regulation and coping with stress. How a child, how a caregivers shape the child's emotional or social well-being. It really matters with the way the parent is spending time with them, or where the adults or the caregivers are spending time with them. And sometimes when there is an insecure attachment style, it might contribute way more to the anxiety or the behavioral challenges. So why we talk about this theory is that when we try to understand why the child is feeling stressed, or why the child is feeling anxious, when they come to us for counseling, when they come to us for help, it is very important to understand what attachment style the child is having at home. Are the parents or are the caregivers present with the child, or are they absent, or how that is happening. So the four type of attachment style, I mean, this is a very deep topic, but to maybe explain it in a very simple way, there are four types of attachment style. One is a secure attachment style, where the child is feeling safe and they can explore their environment. They they are very secure because the parents or the caregivers are very supportive of them. They comfort them when they are in need, so the child is able to share what they are going through. If they're struggling with something, the parent is always there to listen, the parent is always there to guide them. They are not shaming the child. So that is when a secure attachment style occurs. And usually when that happens is that the child grows up to become a healthy adult. So sometimes when we look at the second type of attachment style, which is the insecure attachment style, here the child does not have much emotion, or the caregiver does not give a lot of attention or give them a lot of nourishment. So what happens is that the child also may not show the emotion. The child might also avoid emotions, or might struggle to get into close relationships. So children might not have healthy friendships, or they might choose to spend time by themselves. Then the third one is the fearful, or the disorganized, which is characterized by high anxiety and high avoidance. So here what might happen is that they might contradict their behaviors. They to get attention, they might perform a lot of negative, or to say bad behaviors. They might bully their friends, or they might just to get the attention, they might do things that is not in par with the rules and regulations. So here what happens is that the child is, obviously because of that, there's a lot of consequences. So the child also gets in sort of touch with those consequences. And obviously the fourth style is the anxious attachment style, where the child becomes very anxious when the caregiver is not present. They are very dependent, or over dependent on the caregiver, and without that they might even be very clingy, and because of this they might experience a lot of anxiety, a lot of social anxiety, and which might also affect the way they're present in school. They might not necessarily talk to people around them. They would a lot of crying, a lot of that would happen. So these are the attachment styles. The next is obviously the developmental stages, because when we're looking at children, we are they are growing constantly. For a child who is 3 years old, or a child who is 10 years old, the techniques that we will use will be very different, because they are in different developmental stages, or the milestone that they are in is very different. So there are two developmental stages like that. One is the Erik Erikson stages of psychosocial development. So here this theory speaks about how autonomy, which is the independence and the children and initiative that the children are taking in the early years, and the impact of unresolved emotions and conflicts. Could you give me 1 second? Sorry about that. So yeah, so we were talking about the developmental stages. So here in the Erik Erikson's theory, I will just change. So here we can see, like when we're looking at a child from an infant stage to, in this obviously that goes to the older adult as well, but then from the first stage you can see how to the teenager, the the complexity or the things of the psychosocial development is different. So when we look at a child who is um, if you're looking at a child in the, sorry, a child who is in the preschooler stage, we can see, the main thoughts or the main questions or the conflict that the child is having is, can I take initiative and make decisions by myself, which might not be the same question they are having in the second or the third stage. So it's very important for us, as therapists, to understand at what age the child is, what are the challenges, or what are the conflicts that the child is going through. To give a better example, I will sort of list out the conflicts that the child might be having. So the infant stage or sort of goes from 0 to 1 years. So here, the conflict that the child is having is, are my caregivers taking care of me, are they providing enough care? In the second stage, in the toddler stage, you can see that they're slowly building to develop that independence. They want to do things by themselves. Before, the parents might be helping them with toilet training, but now the child wants to use the washroom by themselves, or they are able to do things by themselves, play the toys independently well in the toddler stage. And in the preschooler stage, the conflict will be that, can I make my own decisions? Can I take this thing to school, or should my parents tell me what to do? So that is the conflict that the child is facing. And in the grade school level, obviously the industry versus inferiority stage, it's that, what are the new skills I'm learning, what are the things, are the skills that I'm learning being used appropriately? And the fifth stage, that is a very important stage as a teenager, that most of us as counselors also face, is that what is my purpose, what is my role in society? So to understand the conflicts that the children are going through when they come to us for counseling, and also understanding that, okay, they're in this stage of the psychosocial development, and this is how I can say fine tune my approach towards this child. And the last sort of theoretical framework is the Piaget's cognitive development. So here we talk about how the thinking patterns evolve as they grow up, and how children might struggle at the beginning, might struggle with a lot of the abstract emotions. They might not be able to understand what is happening. Things are happening around them, their life is changing, things are changing, but then they're not able to understand how that affects them, at a very emotional, at a very feeling stage. They struggle with a lot of these emotions because they're not able to put a term to it. So there we come in as a counselor, or we come in as a therapist to help them identify what emotions they are feeling, right? So the cognitive development, there are four stages. So one, the first, from birth to 2 years, we have the sensory motor stage, where the child is using their senses to understand the environment. So they're touching, they're feeling, they're smelling, they're tasting, to understand what is happening. And in the pre-operational stages, they're using, they're slowly able to start speaking. So they're using language, they're using symbols to understand the environment around them. And when they're in the concrete operational stage, they are able to think, a bit logically. They're able to understand a little bit of a lot of these they might still struggle to understand the abstract ideas, but they're able to understand, like what, when adults are telling them what to do, they're trying to make sense of it. So now let's, after the theory, it comes to, what are the common emotional and behavioral issues that you can see in children, and how can we identify these things? So the first thing is the anxiety and the fear. So when we look at anxiety, there are different ways to identify that the child might be, feeling anxious, or they might be feeling fearful about something, right? So at first, I think a very important skill, or a very important thing for us to have as counselors, or as therapists, or just people around children, is to observe the child without making judgment. We're just trying to observe the behaviors of the child. We're trying to understand how the child is, solving a problem, how are they acting, how are they reacting to the things around them. So when we look at anxiety and fear, The physical symptoms, if we are talking about anxiety, is that they complain a lot about having a lot of headache, body ache, stomach ache, and there's no medical cause. When you look at everything else is fine medically, but they are just complaining about these things. Sometimes you can notice that the child is sleeping a lot in the class, or they're constantly feeling tired compared to in comparison to the other children in the class. You can feel that they're often finding themselves, they don't eat lunch properly in the class. They all the other friends are eating, but you see that they eat like 2-3 spoons and they're full. They're like, no, I don't want to eat anymore, I'm full. So the changes in appetite, a change in their behavior, and a lot of complaining about just a lot of pain without any specific physical cause. There's no health issue, they're just having this pain, unexplained. A lot of emotional symptoms would be that they are very worryful when they fail an exam, or when there's a small change, or when something really small happens, like if they lose a pencil or an eraser, the reaction is a lot. They start crying, they start screaming, or they're worrying a lot. They're like, oh, I can't go home, I can't tell my parents about this, I don't know what will happen. So the reaction to a simple event might be extreme. And they're also worrying about a lot of future events. You can see that they're worrying if the child might be having exam fear or exam anxiety. The exam might be 4 or 5 months away, but they're already starting to fear. They're like, oh my god, exam is coming, I don't know what if I fail. So you can notice that the child is constantly circling or spiraling about a particular anxiety or particular thing that is making them anxious. They're also having a lot of fear or separation. With younger children, you can notice that they have a lot of separation anxiety. They don't like to be away from the parents. They don't like to be away from the caregiver. They always want them to be around them. Obviously, at the first day, second day of school, it makes sense. But even after a year of being in the school, if they're still feeling the same way, then you know that something is not right. And they have a lot of crying spells, a lot of them wanting to be by themselves. They don't want to be with their friends, they want to isolate themselves. So that can be some of the emotional symptoms. And also a lot of negative thinking patterns, a lot of worry. When we look at anxiety or fear, it's a lot of worry about the future. It's like what will happen, and they're overthinking a lot. So this is how we can categorize, or find out if the child might be feeling anxious, or if they're having something fearful, right? And this is when a child might need help, might need support from a professional. Again, attention, and impulse regulation, this again is something we can notice. If the child is having a very short attention span, in the class especially, they find like 10 minutes into the class they're starting, and they're standing up and they're walking around, or they can't stay focused on a particular task. Like if you give them sums to do or something to write, they can do it for like 5-10 minutes, and then they want to just do something else, not the activity that is given to them. They get easily distracted. If someone walks into the class, then after that person leaves, they're not able to get back into the task. There any small noise outside which might be happening in the corridor, they get, they're easily distracted by a lot of noise and movement. They also have difficulty following instruction, where if something is told to them, either they're forgetting the things to do, or they're misunderstanding the tasks, or they're not able to understand. For their age level, or for the age group that they're in, they're not able to comprehend the instructions given to them, and they're usually just spaced out, just dreaming, not focusing on the class. And when you talk about impulse regulation, you can sort of say about they're or often interrupting others. They can't wait for their turn. Sometimes in a class where you're doing like a quiz or something like that, they might know the answer, but it might not be their turn. So what they'll do is they'll raise their hand and be like, they don't want the other person to speak. They want to they are not able to speak on their turn. They have difficulty waiting. You always find them, especially one thing I've noticed is during the playtime, the children are not able to stand in the line. They want to run to the ground, and they're struggling to stay there and just be patient, knowing that eventually we will go to the playground. When they're not able to understand that, and obviously when this frustration happens, like, oh, I want to run, I want to run. So when they are having a lot of this they react very intensely to this frustration of, oh, I can't wait, I have to go there as soon as I can. And obviously they're having difficulty following the rules of the school or rules of, in the school environment. And the third sort of emotional or the common behavioral issues that we see with children is aggression. So aggression usually happens when there is an unmet, when their needs are not met, or when it could be like, like a trauma response. So there are different types of aggression. One is the physical aggression, which is hitting, punching, kicking, throwing, biting, when they're sort of, destroying property around them, or they're bullying others, like pushing them, sort of physically. When they bully someone, then it becomes physical aggression. Verbal aggression is when, they start calling people names, or they're yelling, screaming, they're mocking, taunting, and all of this sounds, when we see children doing this, we might get angry at them. But here we need to know that this is the child that is trying to communicate. They've tried to communicate in a soft, gentle way, but it has never helped them before. So what they do is they sort of resort to aggression as a, what to say, as a way to communicate. They're like, only if I be very aggressive with my needs, then people will listen to me. So usually when children, if someone takes their stationery without their permission, instead of asking or telling them softly, they know that that has never worked before. So what they'll do is they'll start fighting. They'll push them, pull them, snatch it from them, or yell at them, use bad language, because they know that when I do that, then I'll get it back. So their goal is that I have to get my stationery back. But the way they're communicating is not right. So usually again, the unmet needs or the trauma response is, that's where it's coming from. So here, as people, we shouldn't get annoyed at them and be angry more, but to understand where their sort of the tendency of being aggressive comes from. Then obviously there is, in older children, you can notice that there's something called, relational aggression, where they start excluding their friends, or they start gossiping or spreading rumors. This is very common with, teenage kids. If they don't get something they want, they start becoming, like in the movie Mean Girls, where they start gossiping, or they start, pulling pranks on each other, which might, they feel, might not be harmful, but to ruin someone's reputation. So a lot of that. And obviously the passive aggression, where they use sarcasm, they use, or they withdraw from social relationships, or they use, like, body language, like eye rolling, or just physically not or verbally not saying something, but using their body to express their sort of anger or aggression. And the last sort of emotional or behavioral issue that we see very commonly, apart from these three, is peer pressure and bullying, right? So peer pressure is sort of the influence that peers have on each other to sort of explore or encourage certain behaviors that might not be positive or helpful. They might be, very, a lot of risky behavior basically. So how we can see peer pressure presenting in our children, or in our, when we are observing students, is like the way they want to dress, or the, the interest of the group is always very common, or they always want to participate in risky behaviors, which might be, substance abuse, or skipping school, or sort of engaging in unsafe behaviors, because a few people might want to do it or might feel interested to do it. They're sort of peer pressuring other people also to do it, because they feel that other people might also fall into this trap, because they want to gain acceptance and they want to maybe avoid rejection. And obviously the social anxiety of, oh, I don't want to be judged by others, so I will be part of this clique, or I'll be part of the gang. So that is where a lot of this peer pressure comes in, where they're going against their own value system, they're going against their own, you might see, children who are quite polite and quite nice suddenly getting into, peer relationships which are not healthy for them, because they feel that they want to belong in the group. And obviously one more thing that you notice is that their values and belief systems are changing. They want to align with the group, so they shift their value systems, or this, a lot of internal conflict also happens, because they're like, I don't want to do it, but I'm very unconsciously being forced to do it, because I can't say no. And with children, obviously, there is this whole question of who am I, what am I doing. So at that point, this is very important to understand that peer pressure is a very, very significant challenge with children. And obviously, you can notice that they're withdrawing themselves from family. Parents are often coming and complaining, saying that, oh, my child is not spending time with me like how they would. Now they're always on their phone, or their priorities are different now. Their priorities now are to impress this friend group, or to impress the people that they have now become friends with. So it's very important to identify this peer pressure, where it's coming from, and is it in touch with their value system or in touch with their beliefs. The other one is bullying. Bullying is also similar to aggression, but it's repeated aggressive behavior that's being done to either harm or intimidate the other child. It can be physical, or it can be verbal. And obviously, when you look at bullying, a lot of it can lead to isolation and a lot of feeling low self-esteem. When you look at bullying, it's usually physical can present in terms of just hitting, pushing. Verbal can be in terms of threatening or name calling, to belittle the other person, right? And also to spread rumors about this child. And then now a more recent trend is to cyberbullying, through to harass them online, to share pictures of them, especially now with advent or the increase of social media. I think cyberbullying is also something that is very prevalent. And obviously, we can notice how the emotional and behavioral changes happens for the person who is being bullied also, and for the person who is bullying. I think here both of them are, we shouldn't just ignore the person who's bullying and being like, no, we should only focus on the child who's being bullied. The person who is bullying is also going through something, who's also in such a state of mind that they feel that it's okay to bully someone. So here it's both of them that need support, it's both of them that needs help. But when we look at the child who's being bullied, the victim might show a lot of signs of just low self-esteem, feeling depressed, feeling anxious. They might also find they might also have this reluctance to come to school, and also increased in absenteeism, and also withdrawing from social activities. So they're sort of pulling themselves, being more aloof. So these are some of the sort of common emotional, and I would say behavioral issues that we are facing with children when we look as a counselor. um, do we have any questions? I think what we can do is we can put the questions on chat, or keep it to the end. I will try to keep like 5 to 10 minutes for to discuss any questions or something that we might want to discuss about. So now let's try to understand what are the counseling techniques, or what are the therapeutic techniques that we can use with children. So the first technique that we can use is called play therapy. So in play therapy, it helps the children to express emotions through toys and imaginative play. So a lot of research has been done on effectiveness of play therapy, and it helps to play as a concept helps to reduce this emotional distress, and also enhances problem solving. You can always see children often playing with their toys. It's not just for to pass time, but there's also a lot of them just building that imagination. It's also helping them sort of self-soothe in a way. When you look at children playing toys, they're always creating a story with these toys that they have. They're always giving it names. They're always, so that expression of their emotions, which might not come verbally, saying that, oh, I'm feeling X emotion, or I'm feeling Y emotion, they are able to express that through their toys. The toy becomes a medium, or the activity that we choose with the child becomes a medium for them to express what they are feeling. So when we look at some techniques that we can use in play therapy, um, one is called non-directive play, where the child chooses the toys and activities that they want to do, and we just give them a space where you have certain toys, you have certain activities set up for them, and we let the child choose what they want to do. So which also gives us an idea about what the child likes and what the child dislikes. So when you look at it, some children might want to play with clay, some children might want to play with the toy, some children might want to play with a specific kind of toy. They'll be like, no, I want only animal toys, so give me only animal toys, and they're playing with their animal toys. Some children might prefer the hot wheel cars, or some children might prefer different toys, different types of toys. So we just, this is during the first session or the second session, when we are trying to understand the child, we just give them these toys, we give them activities that they want to do, and we just let them do what they want, and we sit and observe, and we also reflect. We don't make any observation, or we don't make any judgment on what the child is doing, but just observe and see what the child is liking. And we also try to understand, okay, this is what they're trying to do, this is what, we're not making any formal judgment here. The next one would be, after we do some non-directive play, try to understand what they like, then we use that, and then we become, we use directive play based on understanding the goals of the child or the needs of the child. Once we understand what's the nature of the problem here, then we give certain, we use certain toys to, with a specific theme or a specific goal, to help the child. So if a child, say, is going through some issues with anxiety, we give them the toys, we help them to narrate or to use them as a storytelling device, and we ask them to make a story out of it, or we ask them to role play with the toys what they might be going through at home, or using that as a key, as an indicator for the child to express. So now it's becoming a little more directive. And the third way we can also use play therapy is to maybe incorporate art, to incorporate music, to incorporate theater, to enhance the self-expression of the child. This obviously might work for older children, say 10 plus, or children who are in their teenage years, to maybe incorporate a little bit of art and music, to understand what kind of music they like, what are the lyrics they're listening to, what does that connect to. Like when we listen to songs, sometimes when we are sad, we might prefer a particular song, versus when we are with our friends and we are more excited, we might prefer a particular song. So we try to understand, okay, what are the songs you're listening to, how does that connect to what you are feeling. So we also use these mediums to understand the child a little better. Again, for younger children, another technique that is very helpful is called sand tray therapy, where they use the trays full of sand which is filled with toys and a lot of miniature figurines, and these create, we try to understand, give the child a more sensory experience, and with that, that might sort of unlock a lot of, the we can sort of reflect on the child's inside, or what's happening with them. This also helps them to, again, or all the techniques that we're using, the end of the day, the goal is to express their thoughts and feelings. And the fifth sort of technique, I would say, is to using storytelling in books. So here, using books, using story books, using picture books, which has a lot of pictures, and small story blurbs to express their emotions and situations. It also helps us to teach them an emotion. When we look at, there are a lot of interactive or sensory related books. When we touch the toy or touch the book, it might make a sound of a child laughing, or it might make a sound of the child crying. So there are a lot of books that are also available, a lot of storytelling techniques, a lot of videos that are available to help the child to explore their emotions, and in basis of the situation or in basis of the things that they might be going through. And they can also, when we show them stories, they're able to relate to the story. When we watch a movie as well, sometimes we might relate to the character, or we might relate to what the person in the movie is going through. That is also something that we can help the child with, to just give that connection that you are not alone. There are so many other characters, there are so many things, so they are able to identify themselves, and that also helps us to understand a little better what the child might be going through. So when you look at why child therapy, why play therapy as a concept helps, is one, because it helps the child express. And any technique we are using, the number one goal should be, how much is the child able to express, how much is the child able to let out, how much is the child able to just give us information about what is happening within them, right? That's always a number one goal. Obviously the second one would be, improving their communication skills, improving their ability to just communicate what they're going through. From the first session to the 10th session, if you see, the child might in the first session might in the non-directive play might just use toys and just like keep hitting each other. But once they also are able to understand, okay, this is a medium for me to communicate, they are able to help give us also the information. Once the rapport is built, they also want to share that information with us, right? So they are able to improve their communication. They are able to uh, sort of give us more context of what they are going through. It also increases, it sort of helps them with their behavior, it helps with their coping skills, and also improves their self-esteem. So we look at play, that is play therapy, and next is art therapy and drawing therapy. So here again, some techniques that are commonly used is free drawing, where the child just draws whatever, and we can just explore the techniques or the way the child is using the pencil, what colors the child is choosing, how they are using the paper. Are they drawing something specific, or are they just scribbling on the paper? What can that tell us about the inner working of the child? And another thing that we can use is also the guided drawing, where we give them specific themes, like draw nature, or draw, can you draw how your house looks like, can you draw the people in it, can you, so we're giving them specific guided. Sometimes a child might not able to communicate. This really helped me also. I can give you one story where one experience of mine where the child was not able to communicate about how many people were there in the family, and clearly something was going wrong at home where the child was not able to cope up in the school. So we tried talking to him, doing all of that. But the second I gave him a paper, I was like, can you draw your house, can you draw how it looks outside, and can you draw how it looks inside, and how many people are there in this house, where does this person sit, where does that person sit? The child was able to immediately give me a picture of how his house looks like, how many people are there, who are the people, where, how do they sort of place themselves in the house. And that gave me a lot of insight on how the child lives, at home. So we can use, again, language can be not be the only way, but sort of helping the child express their emotions, express a lot of other things that they cannot verbalize. And another thing that we can use is also collage creation, painting, using clay for them to sculpt, and also using art to tell us a story. Like they can draw something and tell us a story based on that. So a lot of techniques are available that we can, use with our children. Again, based on the age group that they are in and based on their interests. And I would say the similar benefits as play therapy is also, I would say, connected to art and drawing therapy. And all two can also happen together, where we can use play therapy and art therapy together as well. So next is CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. So a lot of simplified techniques of the traditional CBT that we can there can be used to identify a lot of negative thought processes in the child and help us to replace these negative thoughts with positive thoughts. Some common techniques that I've used with children, or I've seen other counselors, other therapists use is, thought records. This again helps with older children, say 10 plus. Once we teach them a lot of, emotional words, feeling words, to help them look inward and see what they're feeling, right? So thought records is where, they're able to track what are their thoughts and what are the feelings that are coming with it. And we can also help the child with that. Another thing is, cognitive restructuring is something we can use in the session, where a child might say that, I don't feel worthy enough for my parents' love, because I don't get good marks. Because I don't get good marks, I am not worthy of their love. So then we question them, is love so conditional that only if you get good marks you should get their love? Isn't it something? So we are constantly helping them reframe a lot of negative thoughts that they might have come up with for some reason or the other, maybe because of particular instances or particular situations. Once we understand that and once we help them process it, then we help them to reframe a lot of these negative thought patterns, a lot of, and help them to build a more, balanced perspective, that, life is not black or white. There is a lot of gray area in that also, right? Then a lot of um, tests, a lot of, these checklists, a lot of these things that the children can use, that are very found in CBT. We can simplify that for children. There are a lot of resources available, for children who might be feeling anxious. For a lot of these behavioral issues, there are a lot of worksheets available, so we can use that also. Then a lot of, if children are having fear, especially with exams or with particular situations or something like that, we can also use exposure therapy, where we are exposing the child slowly into the thing that is making them very, to desensitize them from their fears, basically, to just help them gradually get over that fear that they might be having, but in a very methodical way, in a very planned way. And obviously, we can also use role playing, where we can build their social skills by helping them understand uh, you know how they're supposed to behave with their friends. If children are, with the second last two issues that I was about talking about, in terms of aggression, in terms of behavior, we obviously acknowledge that bullying and the aggression, but then we also have to tell them that they cannot be aggressive, right? We can accept that they're going through something, but the behavior is not acceptable. So then we teach them social skills, how they can solve a problem from their usual way, how they can be assertive. So we show these through role playing. So a lot of CBT techniques are also there, some that I've mentioned now, and also a lot of other techniques that are there. We can also involve parents in this, involve parents in the child's goals, and help them also, so that they can do this at home as well, right? So that is one. And then the final, I would say, technique that really helps with children, is very important also, is the mindfulness and relaxation techniques. A lot of research shows that it improves attention, reduces anxiety, and also helps with their emotional well-being. So it's very important, when we have an emotion and we are feeling something, there is always a physical reaction that goes with it. There's obviously always a bodily reaction that happens. And sometimes, even when we feel anxious, it's not just the thoughts that's spiraling, but it's also our body going out of control. We are not able to, our breathing becomes erratic, there's a lot of muscle tension. Or when we are angry, or when we feel aggressive, that time also our body gets tensed up, and our breathing becomes abnormal. So it's very important that the child is able to understand that these are signs that something is going to happen, and then they're able to control that immediately. So that's when mindfulness and relaxation really helps. So one is the mindful breathing, where we teach them various, breathing techniques. So one is the belly breathing, there is the box breathing, there are so many breathing techniques. So always when we bring the child in touch with their breathing, immediately other things also reduces, right? So it's very important for us to do that. Then the other one is the body scan, is to understand and notice, how their body is feeling, how their shoulders are feeling, how their chest is feeling, how their hands are feeling, just to ground the child when they are feeling uncomfortable. Is we have to teach them. And another one is that, the guided imagery, especially when the child is feeling very anxious, or when the child feels like, nothing is going their way, or something wrong might happen. We help the child. Okay, first you get in touch with your breathing, then let us imagine a, calm, a safe place for us. It can be, like a calm beach, or it can be like a forest, or something that the child feels is relaxing for them. And let us imagine. So this helps the child also relax their thoughts, become more present, they're more in the here and now. So that is something that we can use. And also a lot of mindful observation, especially, this helps them to bring focus and awareness to themselves, to what is around them. They're able to see, okay, I'm in a classroom, my teacher is present next to me, my friends are there, this is what is in front of me. And again, when we use mindfulness and relaxation, it's always to bring the child to the present moment. At anything that they might be going through, is either it's going in the future or it's in the past. So it's always very important for us to bring them into the present. And another thing we can also teach the child is, the concept of journaling, how they can journal about what they are feeling, about their feelings, about certain things that they might be going through. That helps them sort of improve that level of self reflection as well. And this helps the child to regulate their emotions. So how the child, again, when we talk about journaling, obviously the child has to know what they're feeling to journal, or to understand what they're feeling. So it's very important for us to build this vocabulary, right, that to understand what they're going through. So here what helps is the feelings wheel, a lot of feelings charts, with say, for younger children, maybe with a facial reaction of how that emotion might look. So you look at kindergarten kids, we show them an emotion with the reaction that physically what might happen. So if you're sad, you might cry, or if you're feeling scared, you might cry. So we're showing this feelings chart. We're showing them a lot of these emotional cards to just help build that vocabulary. And obviously as they grow up, we can add a little more words. When you look at that feelings wheel that we use with adults, each emotion is divided into so many, you know so it's like sadness is not just sadness. Sadness can be 10 other things also, and each word is very descriptive of the way you might feel. Like the sadness that you might have after losing a loved one, and the sadness that you have after failing an exam is not the same type of sadness, right? Some the sadness that you have when you lose someone is grief, and then the sadness that you have when you maybe don't get what you want, or you might fail an exam or lose a competition, that's more of disappointments, or that's more of just, just annoyance, something like that. So helping the child understand where is the sadness stemming from, what are the words that we can use. Once we give them that vocabulary, we give them that language, they are able to express what they feel, right? And that also helps them to be more in touch with themselves also. When you don't know what you feel, that's when a lot of the issues start. The second we know what we feel, then we know, okay, now I feel this, what can I do next? So then the problem solving, that immediate understanding of the problem, solving of the problem, all of that happens, and they're able to be more independent. So that's when this helps. The second one we can use is storytelling, as I mentioned earlier, in the play therapy and in the art therapy, using storytelling, using role play as a way to help the child. And obviously emotion coaching, where we teach them about emotions. Obviously when we look at, generally I would say 90% or 80% are the cases that we have I spoken about before, that is the fear and the aggression, bullying and all of that. But sometimes what happens is that we also might be, given stressful, or a lot of crisis situations where there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of trauma involved. So that time we also have to maybe, use a different way of approach. Obviously the things that I mentioned now is how we handle, but then when it comes to like trauma related, you know cases where there's abuse involved, physical, verbal, sexual, that time we also have to be very very mindful. We have to be very careful with the child, with ourselves, with everything, how we approach the situation. The first thing when it comes to handling very critical cases, or very, with cases with a lot of, crisis, it's very important to have a very trauma informed approach, right? Is to understand how trauma impacts the child in the first place, and how the safe space is very important for this child. So here we have to make sure that the environment is as safe as possible. That is, here it should be very child centric. We should not focus on, okay, what are the goals, how to make this child get better marks. That is not, should not be our focus. The first focus is that, are we giving this child a safe environment where they can open up about what they are feeling, right? And then when they feel that safety, is only then they can express what they are feeling. And also a trauma safe space, or a trauma informed space, helps build resilience for the child, because nobody else is talking to them about what they're feeling. So when we give them that space to share what they're feeling, they feel more empowered, they feel more resilient, they feel, like they are able to advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves. Because when abuse happens, something bad has happened to them, and sometimes they might not understand, how do I speak up about it, right? But when we give them that space, they are able to do it. It also improves emotional regulation, and uh, it just helps us to strengthen the relationship with this child. And when it comes to crisis situations, when it comes to situations where abuse is involved, we have to be aware as counselors, as therapists, as professionals working with children, that we are reporting this abuse, right? We are understanding the legal and ethical ways. What are the laws surrounding children? What are the laws surrounding children in terms of how do we report the abuse? What is the steps that is going to happen? We are fully aware, so we are able to immediately, one, get the information from the child and help the child here. We're not just giving them a space to talk about, but also reporting it. So here we are getting in touch with, other professionals like lawyers. We're getting in touch with social workers. So it's very important that we report the abuse to the legal authority that is present in the country or in your state. And the last thing that I would want to talk about is about how do we deal with self ideation or self harm. So this is again something that is, very, I would say, common. First is obviously recognizing what are the signs of self harm. Are we noticing what are the signs? Are we Sometimes the common signs would be that the child is withdrawing from their friends. There's a change in their mood or behavior from usual. They're feeling very hopeless, or they feel that they talk about feeling trapped. They talk about they're not able to express their feelings, but then they also express feelings of, oh, I don't feel like I'm worth it. What is the point of living? There's a very lot of very existential thoughts there, where they're talking about a lot about death or wanting to escape from the world. And this is something that we shouldn't take lightly. We shouldn't say that, oh, it's just children being children, or just like they don't know what they're talking about. When children are talking or using words like this, we have to also put our antennas up and be like, okay, we have this is some warning signs that are available. And also understanding self harm. It might not always lead to a suicidal intent, but we should always keep our guard up, knowing that when we are working with children, when something like this sensitive is happening, we have to build that care with the plan. We shouldn't shy away from talking to them about these thoughts. When they express feeling worthless, ask them a little more about why they're feeling worthless, or maybe build that safety plan with the children, build that care plan, understand why it's happening, where are these thoughts coming from. So when we also talk to them about it, they feel a little more empowered. They're like, okay, someone is understanding us, someone wants to talk to us about this. So that sort of builds within the child. So I think I have only 1 minute left, but I think again this is something I think I can do a whole session about when we talk about self harm, and how we can notice these signs. But I think for now I will stop here. um, so I think I'll open up the panel for questions. If anybody has questions, you can leave it in the chat or ask me here itself. Ashrita, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Hmm.
Hi everyone. Are there any questions? Any thoughts anyone would like to add on to what Laksha has discussed over the workshop? So yeah, about behavioral modification. What exactly in behavior modification are we looking at for now? Is there anything in particular you're looking at?
uh, Related to uh, behavioral issues, how you will do the behavior modification with the kids having some disabilities or some behavioral issues.
Okay, so behavioral modification begins with Laksha, if I may take over for you. Uh,
Yes, yes, please do.
So, behavioral modification first begins with identification of the challenge behavior. You will have to, at any point, and to modify a behavior, we need to define which behavior is bringing a challenge to the child. When I talk about a challenge, is it the inability to complete a task, or is there any harm to the self or others that is involved in the behavior? Is there any loss of motivation to complete a goal or a task? We need to keep that in check. So once we are able to define what is that we want the child to complete or avoid, we need to focus on the motivation behind the behavior. Is it because is the child performing a maladaptive behavior, that is running away or hurting self or trying to bite somebody or hitting some other child, is an escape avoidance response, or is the child trying to move away from the situation by throwing a tantrum because a task is difficult or there is no interest to complete it? So the next step is to find the motivation or define the motivation, and then we move on to the intervention part. In the intervention, we need to first address the attention the child is giving and the response the child is giving to the behavioral therapist or the parent or the teacher or even the counselor or special educator. We need to see the kind of rapport that the child has. So to check for the rapport, we give simple instructions like clap your hands, do roly poly, take a small walk, let's play a clapping game, just to check the compliance the child has with the uh, the person who is giving the intervention. Once the compliance is maintained, the rapport is built, we will start giving different procedures. If it is a maladaptive behavior, we will focus on reducing the maladaptive behavior. For example, we'll use a timer or we will count to the click of 10 and say to the count of 10, I want you to stop doing so and so, or even better, we say to the count of 10, so and so activity is over. And in a very commanding, authoritative, not authoritative, but in a firm, strict voice, we need to give that command. I am not saying we have to raise our voice or shout, but it has to be a firm command. Now, once the child has reduced, automatically take that attention towards the positive behavior or change or bring a new behavior that is more suitable for the child. That is how we help the child move away from maladaptive to replacing with a more appropriate behavior. Now if there is a task difficulty for a child and it is causing irritation and stress to the child, then we will first empathize with the difficulty the child is having by acknowledging, I know it seems difficult, but let us break down the task or the goal into simpler steps. And at each and every given step the child accomplishes, we have to provide a reward. Reward has to go in two ways. First, you will give a verbal reward, and then you will give a tangent reward. Tangent is something the child can see or eat or play with. So, why we focus on verbal reward is we need to teach the child that verbal rewards and praises hold more value compared to small tangential objects. And that is how we will help the child come to task completion. Now, if the child is scared to begin a new activity, we will fully help the child. That is called a full prompt. Once we give a full prompt to the child, slowly we'll move away and ask the child to redo the whole thing again by themselves. If they're not able to do, we can give small little prompts and help for the child to finish the task. Once the child is able to do with small tasks, then again we'll ask the child to do it independently, because here the goal is the child should be able to finish or complete the task by themselves. So this is how behavioral modification goes, Irfana.
Okay, ma'am, but in case of younger children, we can do this, but when it comes to teenagers, it becomes very difficult.
but
If yeah, ma'am.
but in teenagers, what is the challenge behavior that is present?
ADHD, ma'am. When the kids are having ADHD in teenage, it is difficult to manage the behavior because they become very reluctant, or they know because they have this problem, they start taking advantage of their problem. They start manipulating people. skipping
Correct.
tasks.
Oh, understood, Arfana. But what is the challenge that we are discussing here? Is there any maladaptive behavior, or is this a task completion challenge?
Yeah, in ADHD, if they face difficulty in studies, like they have learning disability or something like that, they start giving the excuse that they have this ADHD problem, so they are not able to focus on their studies.
Correct. So now, since we know it is a concentration challenge, it is very easy for us to break the concepts or break the topics into micro parts and
Yeah.
give the hand hold the child to complete micro steps and ask the child to redo the whole thing by themselves. This task acquisition and the confidence the child when they'll get with small steps, they will start setting goals for themselves that okay, one step I did today, next week I will do two steps, then I will do three steps. So until and unless the child is not confident with the concept, it will become very difficult for them to focus. No child with a neurodevelopmental condition will do anything deliberately. Like I
Yes.
said, any behavior will have a motivation. So
Yeah.
they are not trying to manipulate the situation, they're trying to escape and avoid the situation because it is tough for them and they are not able to express that it is difficult for them, which is where the miscommunication is happening between the educator and students.
Yeah, because at this age, in teenage, the studies will be more. So we cannot break the things in smaller step, and the exam pattern will be different, and the time allotted will be the same, just like any other school age kid. So it will be difficult, na ma'am, the time management and motivation, and then breaking the things in small steps.
Correct, Arfana. So when there are free periods when you can go back, there will be some extra classes. You can take the break time to address these issues. If there is no teacher in the class, we can always go back to over there to give them that extra assistance. Or you can give worksheets to the general classroom and focus on these few kids. So there are many ways in which we can tackle these, learning challenges. We can involve the parents by training the parents how to go about, teaching the child. A lot of parents feel worried, confused, and they don't really have a. I'm not saying all parents, but some parents don't really have a solid idea on how to go about, building a timetable or a solid schedule at home. So for those parents, you can teach them how to deliver the concepts at home, so that
Yeah.
the child is engaged at home as well.
The writing will be also an issue for these kids, so making them to write so much on in limited time,
Ifana,
complete.
writing will be a challenge, correct? So make them write a few lines per week, a few lines per month. Break down them. Having unrealistic expectations and worrying about the stress is not the ideal way to proceed here. So it's okay. Initially, it will be very difficult. It's always difficult from step one to step two, but
Yes.
we are at step zero here. So we need to prepare micro tasks, micro goals with appropriate rewards at each step here.
Yeah.
So we are at preparation stage, right? So
Yeah.
instead of having a thought like whether it will work or not, let's just work on it. If it doesn't work, we can always reassess where it went wrong.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Irfan. Is there anyone else who would like to ask anything? Okay. Thank you everyone for taking part in our workshop.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving so much information.
Thank you.
Thank you all for giving time for us. Hope you have a good evening. Thank you.